Welcome guys to an episode with Doomed Hell, and today I wanted to make a video that was a bit interesting, back to console ideas. So I've had a couple of crazy console ideas back in the day, especially with the release of the Xbox One X and also the Xbox Series. I've kind of always been an Xbox guy, but quite a while ago there was a really popular little console called the Ouya. Well, it wasn't so much that it was popular, it was more that the hype kind of ate it in. It was one of those consoles that had, a group following on, well, it wasn't Patreon, it was, what's that other one where you could fund it, a publicly funded console, and it was kind of a cool thing. It was more suited for indie games, and the whole point was that you could just play a bunch of indie games on a tiny Wii-sized console. And that's a play on words, but it was truly like a tiny Wii console. And it was a pretty cool thing, but it was very limited by a lot of factors. One of them is just it just failed to release on time. So, this got me thinking, and there's a lot of stuff that right now in console gaming, it's just been a total mess. For one, we're kind of going away from Blu-ray. Blu-ray's been dying off very slowly, and with the new PS5 Slim, it looks like it's just going to be dead, and that's very sad because Blu-ray is actually very powerful. It allows for a lot of stuff to be locally saved, and we like local saving locally is much better than saving it on the cloud for a lot of cases. And I understand that most people don't really care, but truly we need to come back to that kind of idea. On top of this, a lot of other legacy hardware stuff has been dying out. So for instance, MGPU, which allowed you to run multiple GPUs for a single game, which used to literally give you double the FPS, and that has died out for really no particular good reason. Then you also had things like MSATA, which has been dying out pretty slowly, PS2, which has been dying out pretty slowly, and all these kinds of things which amalgamate to a revival that I believe we should have. So I suggest building a console that is going to save a couple things. So the first thing is that it's going to be Wii-sized, maybe 2x Wii-sized. Maybe around this size, not exactly GameCube sized, but giving you a Blu-ray disc, a read and a write disc on the console, a couple of USB ports on the front, and one mini display port on the front as well, which would allow you to do VR. On the back, you would have basically a extendable SATA card, or a USB, or sorry, not a USB, a double USB 3.2 Type 2X2, which would directly connect to these really cute, basically like a, what's the word, a peripheral card. So two USB 2X2s that would connect into a tiny peripheral card, and that peripheral card would give you a bunch of types of setups that you could have. So for instance, some of them would give you multi USBs, other ones would give you basic PS2, or it would give you things like multiple mini display ports if you need them. On the back, you would receive two mini display ports here. Then you would have your extendable card right here. Then you would have one 10 gig Ethernet, and then you would get your power right here. So what will be the power for this card? It would be basically a double 90 watt Pico ITX setup, which would power on dual Celeron. So 2x Meteor Lake Celeron processors. This would give you 16 cores at 3.6 75 gigahertz. And from the news lately, we've been seeing that, where's the news here? We've been seeing that Meteor Lake has been going into N5, N6 TSMCs, and I believe that this will be totally fine for our purposes. We would have LPDDR5X, of course, running very fast memory, and what I think we should have, so if we have 2x ML Celeron, we're basically running 4x DIMMs, and the whole thing would be connected through a dual PCIe. There's like cool technologies that allow you to run them simultaneously in PCIe mode, or we could also do it the old-fashioned way, which is running a mid-bridge, so a tiny chip that basically allows them to be synchronized. But I think that dual PCIe might just be fast enough, because with the new Meteor Lake gives us 4 times PCIe Gen 4/5 or 5/4, whichever one you prefer. For low latency, Gen 4 is preferred, but for the raw bandwidth, the Gen 5 would be much better. With 5 PCIe, so one of them for each will be used for the connection. Otherwise, you could run full 4 PCIe if you really wanted to, but then you would have you'd have one connection for. No, sorry. You'd have one PCIe Gen 5 that would be restricted specifically for the SSD, and then one that would be split into 2 Gen 4s, and this would be fast enough for our graphics card. So this would not even run our graphics. We could run them, like we could have 2 SoCs with ARC GPUs onto the board, but I believe that we would have enough space in one of these to run 2 separate GPUs. So this would be on one Pico ITX board, and then you would have a secondary and a third board on top of that that would also be running very high-end stuff. So going back to this, so I do want to run mini display ports because they're much smaller than running a full display port, and they basically have the same speeds. And I believe that we could run 2 ARC A750s at A380 TDPs. So we'd be running the full-fledged ARC 750s, which would be 16 gigabytes. Would be 8 gigabytes at DDR6X. And you'd have 2 of these, but they would be running at, they'd be running, at the 75 watts. So this one would be running very small amounts of wattage. This one would probably be running like 35 to 50 watts, and then the rest would be running around 75 watts of TDP, and that would allow the 2 tiny Pico ITX PSU to run together and running around 180 watts of power. So I could probably jerry-rig something like this or very similar to this and kind of test it out, but obviously the biggest issue would probably be drivers to run dual PCIe, and then the second thing would be running MGPU in games would be really, really tough. So that's kind of where I am at with it. I truly think this would be possible, like theoretically, and it would be pretty impressive for like, how powerful it would be. Now, how expensive would it be? It'd be easily in the $800 range, but it would also be very impressive in terms of like what can it do. So quick recap, what would be the actual specs? Like, what would you buy at $800? What would you actually be buying? You'd be buying a 16 core, close to 3950X performance, uh, gaming beast that would run quad channels of 75 megahertz CL32, DDR5X, of course. You would get 1X Gen 5, 4 terabytes, which would compartmentalize into like one, which is Windows. Well, you'd have multi-boot. Theoretically, you'd have multi-boot. Obviously, we would prefer Steam OS in this case because we want to be able to use as much as we can of those dual CPUs, which is just easier to do in Linux. And then running those big Intel chips. I also forgot to mention that I believe that it'd be kind of nice to try to run ray tracing, and this would be through like an NVMe GPU. But this is like a side. Maybe this would be cool, but I'm not sure if it will work out. So you'd get 4 terabytes of 12 gigabytes per second of SSD, which is, pretty much the fastest around. Then on top of that, you would get 2X A750s, which would perform right around the A380, but they would just have a total of 16 gigabytes. And through the magic of PCIe RAM bypass, if you have 48 gigabytes of RAM and then you have another 16 gigabytes, theoretically you could basically run like 4K gaming quite easily. Of course, given that mGPU and what's that other one? The resizable bar works in your favor. Otherwise, it would just not work out very well.